Everyone in the Harlan warehouse knew one rule: stay away from Diesel. The biker gang leader's 120-poter Bulldog had bitten mechanics, shredded chains, and snapped iron chains like toys. No one could get near him without risking a hospital trip, not even the leader himself. So when the creaky side door swung open one humid summer evening and a tiny 7-year-old black girl wandered into the loading bay, everybody froze. Diesel lifted his head. His growl rumbled through the concrete floor. The prospects reached for their knives. The old ladies yelled for her to move, but the little girl didn't run. She didn't flinch. She just tilted her head and whispered something no one could hear. Diesel stopped growling. His ears twitched. And then, in a moment that made every hardened rider step back, the beast everyone feared slowly crawled toward her and placed his massive head gently in her lap. The biker leader watched from the catwalk above, stunned. He'd seen men beg for mercy, crews crumble, rivals fall, but he had never seen his dog obey anyone, especially not a child. What she did next shocked the entire warehouse and revealed a secret about Diesel. No one, not even the biker leader, ever knew. Stay with me until the end, because what this little girl reveals about the Bulldog will change everything you think you know about loyalty. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The Harlan compound sprawled across 15 acres of cracked asphalt and chain-link fences, hidden behind rusted metal gates and security cams that tracked every rumble. Inside the fortress-like setup, oil-stained floors gleamed under flickering fluorescent lights, and murals of roaring hogs adorned walls that had witnessed more secrets than most folks could imagine in a lifetime. But none of those secrets were as dangerous as the one that lurked in the East Bay loading dock. Jax Harlan had built his gang on fear, respect, and an iron fist that never showed mercy. His name alone could make grown men tremble. Cops took his calls. Judges reconsidered their rulings. Rival clubs knew better than to cross him. Yet, there was one creature in his turf that Jax himself couldn't control. Diesel had rolled into the warehouse 3 years earlier. A gift from a road buddy who thought the notorious gang boss needed better protection. The massive English Bulldog weighed more than most grown men and possessed a temperament that matched his owner's reputation for violence. From day one, Diesel proved impossible to manage. The first trainer lasted exactly 47 minutes before Diesel cornered him in the tool shed, snarling with such ferocity that the man climbed onto the roof and refused to come down until Jax's crew brought a ladder. The second trainer made it through 2 sessions before Diesel tore through a reinforced chain like it was dental floss and chased him clear off the lot. By the time the 5th trainer quit, word had spread throughout the outlaw network. Diesel wasn't just aggressive, he was unhinged. The dog attacked crates, destroyed custom leather, and once bit clean through a solid oak bar stool when an old lady accidentally dropped a wrench during a meet. His bark could shatter eardrums. His growl sent shivers through men who had faced down armed rivals without flinching. Even Jax kept his distance. The gang leader had tried everything. Tranquilizers that barely slowed Diesel down. Shock collars that the dog somehow learned to remove. Professional animal behaviorists who took one look at the beast and doubled their fees only to quit within days. Nothing worked. Diesel lived in his loading dock like a king ruling over a kingdom of fear. The crew developed elaborate routes through the warehouse just to avoid walking past his domain. New prospects received stern warnings about the East Bay. Visiting allies were quietly steered toward other entrances. The dog had become Jax's most embarrassing secret. Here was a man who controlled half the city, who commanded armies of loyal riders, who could eliminate rivals with a single phone call. Yet, he couldn't tame one Bulldog. But Jax couldn't bring himself to get rid of Diesel either. Deep down, beneath layers of hardened outlaw instinct, Jax recognized something in the dog's fierce independence, something that reminded him of his own refusal to bow to anyone. Diesel might be uncontrollable, but he was also fearless, loyal to no one but himself, and absolutely ruthless when threatened. In a strange way, Jax respected that. So Diesel remained, a 120-year-old reminder that even the most powerful men had limits to their control. The warehouse crew learned to live with the constant tension. Tina, the head mechanic, made sure fresh meat was delivered to Diesel's dock twice daily, always sliding the bowls through a slot in the heavy metal door. Rocco, the head of security, installed additional cameras around the East Bay, not to monitor intruders, but to track Diesel's movements so everyone could avoid crossing his path. The grease monkeys tended to every inch of the compound except Diesel's domain. The cleaning crew polished chrome throughout the warehouse, but never set foot in the East Bay. Even Jax's most trusted lieutenants, men who would take bullets for their boss without hesitation, gave Diesel's territory a wide berth. The dog had effectively carved out his own untouchable zone within the Harlan Empire. Jax often stood on his second-floor catwalk in the evenings, looking down at the loading dock, where Diesel paced like a caged predator. The gang leader would sip his black coffee and wonder what thoughts ran through the animal's mind. Was Diesel plotting escape, dreaming of freedom, or simply waiting for the next fool foolish enough to challenge his authority? The questions gnawed at Jax more than he cared to admit. Here was a creature that answered to no one, feared nothing, and commanded respect through pure intimidation. In many ways, Diesel embodied everything Jax had spent decades building in himself. Yet, the dog's complete rejection of human connection troubled the gang leader in ways he couldn't fully understand. Jax had always believed that loyalty could be bought, fear could be cultivated, and control could be maintained through careful application of power. Diesel shattered all those assumptions simply by existing. The dog didn't want Jax's money. He showed no fear of Jax's reputation, and he absolutely refused to be controlled by anyone or anything. It was both infuriating and oddly impressive. As months turned into years, Diesel's legend grew within the Harlan organization. New recruits heard whispered stories about the beast who lived in the East Bay. Veteran riders shared tales of narrow escapes from the loading dock. Even rival clubs had heard rumors about Jax Harlan's untamable Bulldog. The dog had become part of the warehouse's mythology, a living symbol of unpredictable danger that lurked behind the compound's gritty facade. But legends, no matter how fearsome, can be shattered by the most unexpected forces. And on this particular humid summer evening, as golden sunlight streamed through the warehouse's tall windows and cast long shadows across the oil-stained floors, that force was about to arrive in the most unlikely form imaginable. The evening had started like any other at the Harlan compound. Tina was polishing chrome in the main garage when she heard the front gate buzzer echo through the warehouse halls. Rocco checked the security monitors and saw a black pickup pulling up the gravel driveway. Its windows tinted so dark they reflected the summer sky like mirrors. Jax emerged from his office, straightening his vest as he prepared to meet his guest. Rocco Malone, a road buddy from the old days, had ridden in specifically to discuss a smuggling run that could prove very profitable for both crews. What Jax didn't know was that Rocco had brought his granddaughter, 7-year-old Alia Jenkins, who sat quietly in the back seat of the pickup, her tight curls framing a face that held an unusual calmness for someone her age. She wore a simple yellow dress and carried a worn teddy bear that had traveled with her from the South Side. Her grandfather had explained they would be visiting a very important man in a very big warehouse, but Aaliyah wasn't particularly impressed by important men or big warehouses. She was more interested in the stories her grandma used to tell about animals who could sense things that people couldn't. As the pickup pulled to a stop, Rocco stepped out and embraced Jax warmly. The two men exchanged pleasantries in rough English, while Aaliyah climbed out of the truck, clutching her teddy bear and looking around with quiet curiosity. "My granddaughter," Rocco explained, placing a protective hand on Aaliyah's shoulder. "Her folks are traveling, so she stays with me for the month. I hope you don't mind that I brought her." Jax forced a smile. Children made him uncomfortable under the best circumstances, and these weren't the best circumstances. He had sensitive business to discuss, and the warehouse wasn't exactly kid-proofed, but Rocco was too valuable an ally to offend over such a small matter. "Of course," Jax replied. "Tina will look after her while we talk." The head mechanic appeared as if summoned, her face lighting up at the sight of Aaliyah. Tina had raised 4 kids of her own, and possessed that maternal instinct that drew youngsters like magnets. She extended her hand to Aaliyah, who took it without hesitation. "Come, little one," Tina said gently. "I have cookies in the break room." But as they walked through the warehouse's main hall, Aaliyah's attention was captured by something else entirely. Through the tall windows that faced the East Bay, she could see into a loading dock where a massive dog lay sprawled in a patch of sunlight. Aaliyah stopped walking. "What kind of dog is that?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than fear. Tina's expression immediately darkened. She glanced nervously toward the East Bay, then back at Aaliyah. "That's Diesel," she whispered. "But we don't go near him, baby girl. He's very dangerous." Aaliyah tilted her head, studying the Bulldog through the glass. From her perspective, Diesel didn't look dangerous. He looked sad. His massive frame was perfectly still. But something in his posture reminded her of the stray dogs she'd seen wandering the streets near her grandfather's place on the south side. Dogs who had forgotten what it felt like to trust. "He looks lonely," Aaliyah observed. Tina's eyes widened in alarm. No, honey. He is not lonely. He is mean. Very, very mean. Come, let's go to the break room." But Aaliyah's attention remained fixed on the loading dock. As if sensing her gaze, Diesel's head lifted. Their eyes met through the window, and something passed between them, a recognition that neither fully understood, but both felt in their bones. The little girl smiled and waved. Diesel's ears twitched forward. Tina noticed the exchange and quickly steered Aaliyah away from the window. "Come now," she insisted, her voice carrying a note of panic. "Mr. Harlan would be very angry if something happened to you." They spent the next hour in the break room, where Tina plied Aaliyah with homemade brownies and fresh milk, while keeping up a steady stream of chatter designed to distract the child from thoughts of the loading dock. Aaliyah was polite and appreciative, but her mind kept wandering back to the sad dog she'd glimpsed through the window. Meanwhile, in Jax's office, business proceeded smoothly. Rocco and Jax discussed smuggling routes, payment schedules, and the intricate logistics of moving certain goods through certain back roads without attracting unwanted attention. Both men were pleased with the arrangements they were negotiating. It was during a brief pause in their conversation as Jax stepped onto his catwalk to take a phone call that disaster struck. Aaliyah had excused herself to use the bathroom. Tina, trusting the child's polite demeanor, had pointed her toward the facilities near the main hall, but instead of following the hallway to the bathroom, Aaliyah had taken a different path entirely. She remembered seeing a door near the windows that overlooked the loading dock. Her 7-year-old logic told her that if there was a door, it must lead somewhere. And if it led to the loading dock, maybe she could get a closer look at the lonely dog. The heavy metal door was unlocked. Aaliyah pushed it open with both hands, surprised by its weight, and stepped into the East Bay loading dock. The evening sun felt warm on her face. The loading dock was larger than she'd expected, with concrete paths winding between crates filled with spare parts. It would have been kinda cool if not for the absolute silence that seemed to press down from all sides. Diesel lay exactly where she'd seen him through the window. But now Aaliyah could appreciate his true size. The bulldog was enormous, his broad chest rising and falling with each breath, his powerful frame radiating barely contained energy, even in rest. As Aaliyah's foot touched the concrete path, Diesel's eyes snapped open. The change in him was immediate and terrifying. His massive frame tensed, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth that looked capable of crushing bone. A growl rumbled from deep in his chest, so low and menacing that it seemed to vibrate through the dock's concrete slabs. Aaliyah froze, not from fear, but from recognition. She had heard that sound before during the long nights when her grandma was dying. The old woman had made similar sounds when pain gripped her so tightly that words couldn't escape. It wasn't anger in Diesel's growl. It was anguish. "You're hurting," Aaliyah whispered. Her voice carried across the loading dock with startling clarity. Diesel's growl faltered. His ears, which had been flattened against his skull in aggressive warning, began to lift. Aaliyah took a small step forward, still clutching her teddy bear. "My grandma hurt too," she continued, her voice gentle and unafraid. "She made sounds like that when the sickness was really bad, but she felt better when someone sat with her." Diesel's massive head tilted slightly, as if trying to understand this small human who showed no fear of his size or his reputation. Aaliyah took another step, then another, moving slowly but with purpose. "I used to read to her," she explained conversationally. "Stories about brave riders and wild open roads. She said the stories helped her remember good things instead of just the hurting." By now, several crew members had discovered Aaliyah's absence from the break room. Tina's panicked shouts echoed through the warehouse halls. Rocco's heavy footsteps pounded across oil-stained floors as he raced toward the East Bay. From his office, Jax could hear the commotion, and was already moving toward his catwalk to investigate. But Aaliyah heard none of it. Her entire attention was focused on the massive dog who watched her approach with an expression that was gradually shifting from hostility to something resembling curiosity. "You don't have to be afraid," Aaliyah said now, close enough to see the scars that crisscrossed Diesel's face and neck. "I won't hurt you." She sat down on the concrete path, just out of reach of Diesel's powerful jaws, and arranged her yellow dress carefully around her legs. Then she looked up at him with eyes that held no judgment, no fear, and no expectation beyond simple companionship. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked for a moment that stretched like eternity. The loading dock held its breath. Diesel stared at the small girl who sat fearlessly before him, her teddy bear clutched in one arm, her other hand extended palm up in a gesture of pure trust. The massive bulldog's scarred face carried an expression no one in the Harlan warehouse had ever witnessed before. Confusion mixed with something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. Then Diesel did something that defied every instinct the hardened outlaws upstairs believed they understood about power and dominance. He lowered his enormous head and took a single careful step forward. Tina's screams from inside the warehouse grew more frantic. Rocco's boots thundered down the metal staircase as he raced toward the loading dock. Jax Harlan himself appeared on his catwalk, his face pale with disbelief, as he watched his untamable beast approach the child with movements so gentle they seemed to belong to an entirely different animal. But Aaliyah remained perfectly still, her dark eyes locked on Diesel's amber ones, her voice continuing in that same soft storytelling cadence that seemed to cast a spell over the entire compound. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a brave dog who lived in a big old warehouse. But the dog was very sad because everyone was afraid of him. They didn't know that deep inside. He just wanted someone to understand that he wasn't really scary at all." Diesel's massive frame trembled slightly. His breathing, which had been sharp and aggressive moments before, began to slow and deepen. The rigid tension in his shoulders started to ease as Aaliyah's words washed over him like a gentle tide. The dog had forgotten what it felt like to be loved. Aaliyah continued, her voice carrying across the loading dock with remarkable clarity. He had been hurt so many times that he forgot how to trust. So he growled and snapped to keep everyone away, because being alone felt safer than risking more pain. From the catwalk above, Jax gripped the metal railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. In 30 years of controlling men through fear and intimidation, he had never witnessed anything like this. His most dangerous possession, the creature that had terrorized trainers and crew alike, was being transformed before his eyes by nothing more than a child's gentle words. Diesel took another step forward, then another, until he was close enough that Aaliyah could see the network of old scars that marked his face and neck. Some looked like bite marks from other dogs. Others appeared to be from chains or restraints pulled too tight. His left ear bore the telltale notch of a fighting ring, and his muzzle carried the faded marks of a cage worn too long. Aaliyah's expression didn't change as she took in these signs of Diesel's brutal past. If anything, her eyes grew softer with understanding. "You were hurt before you came here," she whispered. "And it wasn't a question. Someone was very mean to you, weren't they?" Diesel's ears flattened, but not in aggression this time. In shame, his massive head drooped, as if the weight of his memories had become too heavy to bear. "But that wasn't your fault," Aaliyah said firmly, her 7-year-old voice carrying an authority that would have impressed judges and senators. "Being hurt doesn't make you bad. It just makes you scared." The little girl slowly extended her hand, palm still up, fingers relaxed and unthreatening. "My grandma told me that scared animals need extra patience. She said, you have to show them it's safe to trust again, one little bit at a time." Diesel stared at her outstretched hand for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent. Sweet and clean and completely free of the fear sweat that had marked every other human who had entered his domain. Then, moving with a delicacy that seemed impossible for such a massive creature, Diesel stretched his neck forward and gently pressed his nose against Aaliyah's palm. The touch lasted only a moment, but its impact rippled through the warehouse like an earthquake. From the break room, Tina's sobbing prayers grew louder. Rocco, who had finally reached the loading dock door, froze with his hand on the handle, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter whatever magic was unfolding before his eyes. Jax Harlan, a man who had built an empire on his ability to read and control situations, found himself completely powerless to understand what he was witnessing. His daughter had been roughly Aaliyah's age when she died in the bike wreck that had hardened his heart forever. Watching this fearless child work miracles with his untouchable dog awakened emotions Jax had spent years burying beneath layers of calculated cruelty. Aaliyah smiled as Diesel's warm breath tickled her palm. "See, you're not scary at all. You're just lonely." She began to tell another story. This one about a rider who befriended a wild Mustang that everyone else feared. As her voice wove through the evening air, Diesel gradually relaxed further, his massive frame settling onto the concrete path beside her. His breathing deepened into something approaching peace. But Aaliyah's stories carried more than just comfort. With each gentle word, she was unlocking memories that Diesel had buried so deep he had almost forgotten they existed. Images of a time before the fighting rings, before the chains and cages, before the systematic brutalization that had turned a loving puppy into a weapon of pure aggression. There had been another little girl once, long ago, a child with gentle hands who had smuggled him treats and whispered secrets in his ear. She had been torn away from him when the fighting ring owners decided he was ready for more serious training. He had never seen her again, but her memory had lived in the deepest part of his heart, buried beneath years of pain and rage. Aaliyah's voice was different from that long-lost child's, but her fearlessness was the same. Her kindness was the same, and for the first time in years, Diesel remembered what it felt like to be more than just a monster. As the evening shadows grew longer, Aaliyah continued her stories. She told Diesel about brave riders who protected the innocent, about wild open roads where every creature was valued, about friendships that could overcome any obstacle. With each tale, the invisible walls around Diesel's heart cracked a little further. The crew members who had gathered to witness this impossible scene began to whisper among themselves. How could a child who had never seen the dog before understand exactly what he needed to hear? How could her presence alone transform the warehouse's most feared resident into something approaching gentleness? Even Rocco Malone had emerged from Jax's office, drawn by the commotion, and now stood beside his host on the catwalk. The old man's weathered face carried a knowing expression that suggested this wasn't the first time he had witnessed his granddaughter's unusual gift with troubled souls. "She has always been this way," Rocco murmured to Jax. "Animals, they sense something in her, something pure that the rest of us have lost." Jax nodded slowly, unable to take his eyes off the scene below. "What happened to her parents?" he asked quietly. Rocco's expression darkened. "Killed by a rival crew 3 months ago. Aaliyah, she was in the truck but survived. The doctors, they said it was a miracle she wasn't hurt worse, but I think maybe she was hurt in ways that don't show on the outside." The revelation hit Jax like a physical blow. This fearless child had suffered losses that would have broken grown men. Yet here she sat, offering comfort to his untamable beast with a generosity of spirit that shamed every hardened outlaw in the warehouse, as if sensing the weight of the adult conversation above. Aaliyah looked up towards the catwalk. Her dark eyes met Jax across the distance, and she offered him the same gentle smile she had given Diesel. "Your dog is very brave," she called up to him. "He just needed someone to remind him." Jax found himself nodding, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing with. Nothing about this evening made sense according to the rules that had governed his life for decades. Power came from strength and fear, not from gentle words and patient kindness. Control was maintained through dominance, not through understanding. Yet here was proof that his fundamental assumptions about the nature of strength might be completely wrong. Aaliyah had accomplished in 20 minutes what teams of professional trainers had failed to achieve in 3 years. She had reached past Diesel's aggression to touch something deeper, something that no amount of force or intimidation could access. As the sun began to set over the Harlan compound, casting golden light across the loading dock, Aaliyah finally stood up and brushed the dust from her yellow dress. Diesel immediately rose as well, his massive frame positioning itself protectively beside her much smaller one. "I should probably go back to my grandfather now," Aaliyah said, speaking to Diesel as if he could understand every word. "But maybe I can visit you again tomorrow?" Diesel's tail, which hadn't wagged in anyone's memory, gave a small, tentative wag. The sight of that simple gesture broke something loose in Jax Harlan's chest. He gripped the catwalk railing tighter, fighting back emotions he had thought were dead and buried with his own daughter. Below in the loading dock, Aaliyah reached up and gently stroked Diesel's scarred cheek. "Remember what I told you about being brave," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. You have friends now." As she walked toward the loading dock door, Diesel followed a few steps before stopping as if some invisible chain held him back. But his eyes remained fixed on Aaliyah until she disappeared through the doorway, and even then he continued staring at the spot where she had been. The warehouse erupted in whispered conversations and nervous laughter as the crew tried to process what they had witnessed. But Jax remained on his catwalk, watching his transformed dog settle back onto the concrete path with an expression of patient waiting. For the first time in 3 years, Diesel wasn't pacing his domain like a caged predator. He was simply lying still, his amber eyes focused on the door through which Aaliyah had vanished, his entire being radiating a calm contentment that seemed to spread through the very air around him. That evening, after Aaliyah had been reunited with her grandfather, and the warehouse had settled into an uneasy quiet, Jax found himself standing alone in the loading dock. The concrete paths gleamed silver under the moonlight, and the air carried the faint scent of motor oil from the garage beyond. But his attention was fixed entirely on Diesel, who lay in the exact spot where Aaliyah had left him hours earlier. The massive Bulldog hadn't moved. He remained curled on the concrete, his amber eyes reflecting the pale light as they stayed locked on the door through which the little girl had disappeared. Every few minutes his ears would perk up at distant sounds from within the warehouse, hope flickering across his scarred features before fading back into patient waiting. Jax had never seen anything like it. For 3 years, Diesel had been a force of pure destruction, a living weapon that even Jax couldn't control. Yet one evening with a 7-year-old girl had transformed him into something Jax barely recognized. The change wasn't temporary either. Hours had passed, and Diesel showed no signs of returning to his old aggressive patterns. Rocco appeared at Jax's shoulder, his weathered face creased with confusion. "Boss," he said quietly, "what do we do about this? The men are asking questions." Jax understood the concern. His reputation was built on absolute control, on the ability to dominate any situation through superior force and cunning. Having his most dangerous possession tamed by a child raised uncomfortable questions about his authority. Word would spread beyond the warehouse walls. Rival clubs would hear whispers about Jax Harlan's softening, about weakness creeping into his empire. But as Jax watched Diesel's vigil, he found himself caring less about those implications than he would have expected. "Tell the men to keep their mouths shut," he said finally. "What happened here today stays here." Rocco nodded and melted back into the shadows. But Jax remained in the loading dock. Something about Diesel's transformation nagged at him, demanding deeper examination. The dog's change had been too complete, too immediate to be explained by simple training or even exceptional kindness. Jax had witnessed Aaliyah's gentleness, heard her soothing words, seen her fearless approach. But there had been something else in the interaction, something that transcended normal human-animal bonding. The way Diesel had responded to her presence suggested recognition rather than mere acceptance. A memory stirred in Jax's mind. 3 years ago, when Diesel had first rolled into the warehouse, the road buddy who delivered him had mentioned the dog's background, something about fighting rings and previous owners. Jax hadn't paid much attention to the details then. Focused as he was on acquiring what he believed would be the perfect guard dog, now those forgotten details seemed crucial. Jax pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Marco Tate answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice carrying the weariness of a man who conducted most of his business after midnight. "Jax, what can I do for you at this ungodly hour?" "The dog you brought me 3 years ago," Jax said without preamble. "Diesel, I need to know everything about where he came from." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's ancient history, Jax. Why the sudden interest? Just tell me." Marco sighed, the sound crackling through the phone speaker. "I got him from a fighting operation that got shut down by the cops. Brutal place from what I heard. The dog was one of their top fighters, undefeated in the ring. But he had behavioral issues that made him difficult to handle, even for those animals." Jax's grip tightened on his phone. "What kind of behavioral issues?" "Unpredictable aggression, mostly. But here's the strange part. The handler said he was completely different around children, docile, almost protective. They used to use a little girl to calm him down between fights, some street kid they'd picked up. Apparently, she was the only one who could get near him when he was worked up. Jax's blood ran cold as Marco's words sank in. The little girl from the fighting ring. Aaliyah's instant connection with Diesel. The way the massive Bulldog had responded to her voice, her touch, her presence. It all made horrifying sense. Marco. Jax's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to that girl? Another pause. Longer this time. Word was she got adopted by some family. Nice people, I heard. Got her out of that hellhole before it was too late. Jax's mind raced. Aaliyah's parents killed 3 months ago. Her survival against impossible odds. The way she seemed to understand Diesel's pain without explanation. The recognition in both their eyes when they first saw each other through the warehouse window. The family that adopted her, Jax pressed. You wouldn't happen to know their name? Jenkins, Marco replied. Why all the questions, Jax? This is ancient history. Jax ended the call without another word. His hands trembled as he stared down at Diesel, who remained motionless in his vigil. The dog wasn't waiting for just any little girl to return. He was waiting for the one person who had shown him kindness in the darkest chapter of his life. The child who had been ripped away from him when the fighting ring decided he was ready for more brutal training. Aaliyah hadn't just calmed a dangerous animal that evening. She had reunited with her oldest friend, a friend who had never forgotten her gentle hands, her soothing voice, her fearless heart. Diesel's transformation wasn't magic or miracle. It was recognition. It was love. It was the unbreakable bond between two souls who had survived hell together and found each other again against impossible odds. Jax Harlan had built an empire on the belief that loyalty could be bought and fear could control anything. But watching Diesel's unwavering devotion to a little girl who had saved his spirit years ago, the gang leader finally understood the difference between obedience and true loyalty. One was a transaction. The other was a choice that transcended everything else. Sometimes the most powerful connections aren't forged through strength or intimidation. Sometimes they're built through simple kindness offered to someone who needed it most. And sometimes those connections can survive anything the world throws at them, waiting patiently for the moment when two broken souls can heal each other once again.